Pour ceux d'entre vous qui nous rejoignent pour la première fois, notre série d'entretiens s'intitule Célébrer les 80 ans de l'Institut Thomas More. Dialogue et rencontre entre nous et face aux enjeux de notre époque. La rencontre de ce soir s'intitule À la rencontre de l'autre, dialogue et éducation. Entretien avec Eva Pomeroy et Jessica Riddell. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third segment of our four-part Spring 2026 interview series. For those of you who are here for the first time, our interview series is called Celebrating 80 Years of the Thomas More Institute, Dialogue and Encounter with One Another and the Issues of Our Time. This evening's encounter is entitled Encountering the Other, Dialogue and Education, an interview with Eva Pomeroy and Jessica Riddell. So I want to start tonight with a land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting in Montreal on the island known as Tiohtià:ke, the traditional territory of Kanien'kehá:ka people. This island has long been a gathering place for many nations. In many indigenous traditions, the land itself holds memory, language, and knowledge. Acknowledging this place is therefore more than naming a territory. It is recognizing that the land beneath us carries stories and responsibilities. May that awareness guide how we gather and learn together this evening. So I thought for those of you who are new to the Thomas More Institute that I would say a little bit about who we are. So the Thomas More Institute was founded in 1945. It is a secular, nonprofit academic institution and a pioneer in adult education across Quebec. Celebrating 80 years of leadership this year, the Institute provides a unique space that combines the intellectual rigor of a university with the accessibility and warmth of a community organization. Our mission is to create an environment where adults of all ages gather to think deeply, question freely, and build community through shared, curiosity-driven learning. Our distinctive pedagogical model emphasizes conversation-based learning over traditional lectures, nurturing both critical thinking and a strong sense of belonging. So events like these are made possible by generous donations from all of you, from people like you. So if you would be interested in making a contribution after the event, that possibility is available to you, and we would be so grateful for it. The format for this evening. There's going to be a 1-hour interview with our wonderful guests, and I'm going to say more about them in a minute. And then after that, there will be a question period that will last until 8 o'clock. From 8 to 8:30, we'll have a reception with wine so we can continue the conversation in that very civilized, convivial way. So please note that photographs will be taken this evening so that we can post about the event on our social media. If you prefer not to be in them, then please maybe try to make it to one of the sides, and that should be just fine. I will also note that the interview portion of this evening will be recorded, but not the question period. So I'm going to turn now to introductions, and first I'm going to introduce our interviewer. So our interviewer is Rina Kampeas. Rina Kampeas holds a BA in Honors English from Loyola College, conferred by Université de Montréal, and an MA in English Language and Literature from Oxford University. Until the mid-1980s, Rina viewed herself as destined for a career in academia. While that career orientation eventually changed, she never lost her pleasure in scholarship, research, and theoretical thinking. From 1992 until she retired a few years ago, she was self-employed as a French to English translator, eventually specializing in translating scholarly articles in various fields. Along the way, she taught part-time intermittently at Bishop's University in Sherbrooke in English and Women's Studies. She helped found the Women's Studies program at Bishop's and she held jobs in the nonprofit and public sectors. For the past dozen years or so, she's focused her volunteerism, I'm very happy to say, on the Thomas More Institute, serving as a course discussion leader and a course designer. She was also a member of our curriculum committee for many years. And now for our interviewees for tonight. We are very pleased to have with us Eva Pomeroy and Jessica Riddell. Welcome to both of you. Dr. Eva Pomeroy is a research lead and senior faculty at the Presence Institute and affiliate faculty in the Department of Applied Human Sciences at Concordia University. She is co-lead faculty of ULab, an online to offline change process offered in partnership with MIT. That is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So it's with MIT Online. Eva is co-founder and managing editor of the Journal of Awareness-Based Systems Change, a Scopus-listed publication that has become a key platform for this emerging field. Her work sits at the intersection of expanded epistemology, collective awareness, and social transformation. In her research and practice, she explores what it means to build a rigorous science of the social field, the deeper structures of awareness that shape the relational quality of social systems. She is currently contributing to an initiative to develop multi-method research infrastructures to make the invisible and relational dimensions underlying social systems visible. Underlying all this work is a commitment to expanding what counts as valid knowledge for informing action, recognizing that epistemic justice and collective healing are inseparable. You can see it's going to be a very, very I'm going to leave now. You may not be. Doctor, now you can be wowed by another Bible. Dr. Jessica Riddell is a full professor at Bishop's University and the inaugural Stephen A. Yaroslavsky Chair of Undergraduate Teaching Excellence. A nationally recognized educator, public intellectual, and higher education leader, she is known for reimagining universities as public institutions oriented toward human and ecological flourishing. She is the founder of the Hope Circuits Institute and the author of Hope Circuits, Rewiring Universities for Human Flourishing. She's also co-author of Shakespeare's Guide to Hope, Life, and Learning. Dr. Riddell serves on the board of directors of the American Association of Colleges and Universities and has received Canada's highest teaching and engagement honors, including the 3M National Teaching Fellowship and election to the Royal Society of Canada College of New Scholars for her national contributions to the humanities. So, wow. Without further ado, I hand it over to Rina. Thank you. Yes.
So, dear ladies, you're here this evening because of this theme, encountering the other and dialogue. And some members of our community, for each of you, knew of you and thought a good person to invite to talk about that. Each of you has supplied us with a reading that we disseminated to those who registered to come tonight, and that I read. I guess you've read each other's. And what strikes me about finding out about both of you from the readings and from what I learned about your backgrounds is that there's so much that is in dialogue, in a sense, and potentially in dialogue in the two readings and in your backgrounds. There's a lot that's distinct. And so it led us to think that it would be interesting to know for each of you how you came to this stage in your career where you went into and became deeply invested in the process of making change. And the process of making change in the educational world, making change in the community. And so you, Jessica, you came from a background as a scholar of early modern English literature, Shakespeare. You, Eva, you were in the field of applied human sciences at Concordia, and each of you is now connected to an institute, and you till the soil of helping people make change in good ways. I'll start with Jessica. How did that come about?
You're like, tag, you're it. Thank you for that question. And I think it's, I answer the question differently every time I'm asked it, but how did I come to transformative change in education?
Yeah.
The short answer is it was an accident, and the universe is a better party planner than I am. And I just finished writing a book that Carol referenced, Shakespeare's Guide to Hope, Life, and Learning. And I just finished it with my two weird sisters, my two witches from Macbeth, my two incredible co-authors, Dr. Lisa Dixon and Dr. Shannon Murray. And we had just spent 5 years writing a book with the one challenge of how do we write so that we sound like ourselves. Because as Shakespeare scholars, I don't know if you've ever read a Shakespeare article, but it is kind of boring. I see Lorette in the back. We're working on some Shakespeare magic and alchemy right now, but often when I read Shakespeare articles and Shakespeare scholarship, they leave out all the fun bits, all the stuff that called me to this work in the first place, all of the jokes, all of the naughty bits, all of the weirdness. Sometimes you find them embedded in a little footnote somewhere. And so I had dismembered myself as a Shakespeare scholar for many, many years until I found my community, until I found my weird sisters working on edges and margins of our disciplines, but also in our institutions. And so we wrote this book called Shakespeare's Guide to Hope, Life, and Learning. And it is playful and it's irreverent and it's messy. And we talk to each other in the margins. We imagine Shakespeare's 10 best parties and 10 worst parties. Spoiler alert, the worst party is King Lear's retirement party. But we play and we remembered what brought us to this work in the first place. And so we wrote this book and we had finished it in February of 2020. And we were just so elated. We had finally found our voices in our community, and we carved out this little niche of scholarship. And then, as you know, March 13th, 2020, every university and college closed, every, K to 12 closed. My kids came home 4 and 6 with their little backpacks and their little indoor shoes. And we were promised it was 2 weeks, shelter in place, everything's going to be fine, get a pandemic puppy. We put all the rainbows in our windows, right? Ça va bien LA. Do you remember that? I'm sorry if I'm triggering anything. Processed grief. But what happened was this book, which is where we located hope. We located hope in classrooms and in the theater and in a civil and just society, these 3 places where we were exercising hope as a muscle in one day closed. And that was shocking to us. That was shocking to so many of us. And so at that same time, my kids came home, and a couple of days later, my husband, who is a smoothie drinking, salad eating, 6 days a week exercise junkie, was diagnosed with lung cancer. So all of a sudden we have this moment, we were talking about this at dinner, where I kept reading Pema Chodron's book, When Things Fall Apart, right? This amazing Buddhist nun who lives in a monastery in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. And you just get pinned to the present moment. Everything else, everything extra, everything that you thought you knew about the world, when it falls apart, the things that are left are, for me, hope, community, connection, relationship. And it forced me into a position where I had to ask what is the most important and real and imminent. So it was my children first, it was my partner, but it was also where and how can I locate hope at this moment that feels impossible. And so I started to reach out to people and just ask them the question, how are you getting out of bed in the morning? It was not a book. It was not a change movement. It was not an institute. It was an earnest and open howl into the abyss. Is anybody out there? How are you holding light? How are you getting out of bed? And I created this little corner of my basement. It was a half of a ping pong table wedged up against the pool table. And I covered it in blankets. so that it was soundproof because I have a dog and a cat and 2 little humans and a giant husband. And it was my only little corner of the world. I called it my blanket fort. And I started to Zoom with people. How are you getting out of bed in the morning? How are you doing? Where are you locating hope? And then I started asking questions like, if this moment is unlike any moment we've experienced in certainly a generation, maybe in 100 years, maybe in 400 years, what is possible? If everything we thought we knew is falling apart, where do we build in the ashes of it? And so one conversation led to another, led to 300 thought partners over 2 years, thousands of pages of transcripts, and all I did was listen. As an early modernist, as a Shakespeare scholar, I just listened to people telling stories. And what I noticed from the 300 people that I was interviewing, and they were from all different backgrounds, disciplinary lenses, intersectionalities, diverse lived experiences, is they were using some of the same tools. These 300 people might have named them differently, might have deployed them in different contexts, but they were getting out of bed for some of the same reasons: purpose, hope, imagining a world that is more just and more inclusive, and they were using these tools. So I just distilled over a few years the 10 conceptual tools that they were using. And then I just built this book. It was accidental. I didn't mean to write a book for anybody to read. I just needed to write through this moment of groundlessness. And so from that, I've just been holding on. The book came out March 12th, 2024. It came to my doorstep and I opened it up and I thought, God, I hope nobody reads this book. Because I say a lot of quiet things out loud. I drop some truth bombs in love and hopefully in generous invitation, but I say some of the quiet things out loud. My mother called me up and she's like, did you have to say the F-bomb twice in your book? I'm like, sometimes, Mom, yes, that's the only word. But I have just been holding on and letting this book sort of lead me into conversations with folks over the last 2 years that have taken me to 70 colleges and universities and 50 associations where people have an appetite to do something differently, to imagine something else is possible. And I don't tell them what to do. I don't have a 10-point checklist about this is what you do in any kind of prescriptive way, but I sit in collective sense-making spaces with people as we co-create blueprints for a future that is not only unfurling as we see it, but possible. And so I think that my short answer was accidental. My long answer was just my origin story. Yeah.
Thank you. So it emerged from engaging with people
in dialogue. It was
in dialogue.
Polyvocal, it was conversational, it was, nobody has one answer, but together, my goodness, we've got all the tools we need hiding in plain sight.
To build hope and to build change, become more inclusive, change the campus world. Thank you. And the book is Hope Circuits, if Carol wants to hold up her copy.
I did not pay. Yeah, so, Vanna White from the Thomas.
I'm so proud.
And so, Eva, will you tell us how you came to be working with the Presencing Institute and everything that goes with that?
Sure. And I just want to pick up, I think the story of both your books, I just love that it's about like how innovation happens from the margins and from maybe the unexpected spaces. So that really struck me. And the other thing is I hope that we talk more about like speaking out loud what we don't speak and making visible what's invisible, because I think those are big parts of what we're trying to do. And then full disclosure, I didn't know this was the opening question until just when we were at dinner. So I'm like, how did I get here?
There was a misunderstanding. We checked in with each other on Zoom. And we didn't script anything, but we said, here's the opening question. And I generally, in a general way, and I seem to have lost the thread with what I actually said, which was, what's your origin story? It seems that's what I really said to these ladies. And over time, I thought I had said what I just asked.
Yes. Okay. No, I have a super answer to a different question.
That's what
I sound really in flow. It's because I practiced this one. So I was just thinking, like, so the Presencing Institute, the work that we do is a kind of a field that we call awareness-based systems change. Yeah. So how do you cultivate and support and steward systems change but from a place of consciousness, not just like personal consciousness, but collectively, like how together can you see and sense and operate from a different kind of awareness. So that's the work. And so then I'm like, okay, how did I come to this? What led me here? And so the things that come to me are, I think I always had a real yearning for and draw to like education that matters. That's the phrase that comes into my head. And so the kind of learning that really connected to me to a deeper sense of who I am, a deeper sense of meaning, a deeper sense of purpose. And I didn't find that in my education. I didn't find I did a degree in political science as an undergraduate. I found it when I graduated and started to work for Outward Bound, which some of you might know. So where, the outdoors is just, it's the third teacher, it's the holder, it's the place where together with a group of people, you move through a literal journey, but also a real journey of kind of self-development and group development. So there's that piece about just feeling very passionate and enlivened by education that connects to meaning and purpose. There's also a social justice angle. So when I did go, it's amazing to me that I went back to graduate school because I did not enjoy university, but I found my way back there and studied the experience of young people who were excluded from school. I was living in Britain at that time. And so just like really unpacking, what is it kind of structurally that just makes this, it designs these systems that actually expel children, right? Expel people, right?
Yeah.
So there's that angle. So that's kind of the weaving of deep transformational learning, social justice. And I guess the other piece that connects to some of what was in the introduction about the social field and about kind of expanded epistemology is in reflecting on all of my formal education, kind of just an awareness that I love sort of cognitive exploration, it's fun to apply your mind to something. But that doing only that, it is like cutting yourself off at the neck, right? And so if I think about how do I really live my life, like how do I make the big decisions? It's not through my cognition, it's through an intuitive knowing, a relational knowing, right? An embodied knowing. And so how could, and that knowing is real and it matters and it counts, but not so much in formal education. So how can we expand what we consider to be kind of valid and reliable information to source action, not just individually, but again, so I think we can do that individually quite well, but we don't really have the structures and the ways of how could we together like operate from those kind of deeper places of knowing. Yeah.
And I encountered the phrase an expanded epistemology in the text you sent us. Thank you. So you actually provided us with two texts and we chose one to disseminate. And that was one written by Dr. Otto Scharmer, who I understand founded the Presencing Institute. And it was submitted to a working group of the OECD, I understand. And that one was entitled Universities as Innovation Ecologies and some more. And the other one was a scholarly article that you wrote with Dr. Scharmer from a year before. And I found in reading it, so it nourished my thinking about this evening, that it provided a kind of more granular, a really granular understanding of what Dr. Scharmer was saying about how universities could change in the 21st century. A key notion, well, there's presencing in and of itself as an idea, the name of the institute, there's that, but a key notion in both the text that we did distribute to those who are here tonight and the other more the scholarly article is the notion of fourth person knowing. And it's situated in a context of covering what it means to have first person, second person, and third person knowing, and then what changes when you get to fourth person knowing. So I wondered if I could ask you, Eva, and then afterwards I'll ask you questions again, Jessica.
I'm here to listen.
If you'd mind expanding on that for our audience, they're unfamiliar and they're very powerful ideas I found when I was reading the denser article.
Sure, yeah. And I think what I would start with is a question where I kind of spend a lot of time. And the question is, when something new comes into being, right? And what I mean something like really new, not a reconfiguration of the old, but something, there's a genuine creation, something comes to life that wasn't. Where does it come from? I think that's just such a great question. I know there's somebody named Joe Jaworski who wrote a book on synchronicity, and his study, he worked in business, and you have these young entrepreneurs who would say, when they talked about their idea, like, well, it came to me that, and you'd say, where did it come from, right? And so I find this fascinating. It's so powerful and so resonant and real, right? Because I felt it, when that insight comes, or a kind of knowing that I think, wow, okay, that didn't come from inside me. But let me back up a little bit in terms of the person perspective. So if we kind of take a trip through those, I start with third, actually, because that's the that's our most developed, I think, approach to research and inquiry. Yeah. So we have all kinds of methodologies, which are great for observing things outside of us and measuring them and understanding them, and that's a good thing, right? I think, I'm going to go into some places that are a bit more esoteric, but that's not, I think about, we need a materialist science for our material world, right? And I don't want to drive across the St. Lawrence on a bridge that was built intuitively, right? So we need that, like that knowing, and we're good at it. And then I think from that tradition, particularly in North America, particularly coming out of the Chicago school in the 60s, but even before that, there was this sort of recognition of, okay, but there's also this subjective experience, right? The first person experience, that counts. You can learn a lot from diving deep and better understanding personal experience. So that there's the first person. And then the second person emerged shortly afterwards around what can you learn between us? So in what we're doing right now in dialogue, what services. Yeah. So all of that really important. But there is this other piece about a knowing that shows up in us, but it's not of us. So the knowing that comes through. I think, in some ways this is super on the margins, and yet we put this article out, and I cannot tell you how many people wrote in response, and how much it's been read, and how much people are from different places in the world connecting it to their various wisdom traditions. And so I think this is really, this is making the less visible visible. It's speaking the unspoken, that there is a kind of knowing, we talk about it as being held in the field, that under the right conditions shows up in us. And so there's just a lot of, if we're going to take that seriously, and if we're going to build ways to work with that kind of knowing together to inform the way that we create systems and make decisions, there's a lot of work to do. And that's the kind of work of the social field research. And maybe I'll stop there.
Okay. Yeah, so what I hear is fourth person knowing takes you into a level that transcends what third and then first and then second do.
Yeah, and maybe I can sort two things. Yes, we talk about it as trans-subjective.
Okay.
And also just, I think what's really key is we see that as the real root of real innovation. Like really when something genuinely new comes into being, it's that kind of knowing that is the stimulus for us.
And you access it in a sense by accessing the deep knowing of your community or of a community of people.
And and drawing on our capacities to sense, right? Our capacities to, our embodied knowing, our intuitive knowing, and how we can do that together rather than our cognitive knowing.
Okay, one more little question about that. I was working to understand action research. I'm not a social scientist. I know it's a field from the social sciences, and it figures very prominently in what I read of your work. Does the idea of first, third person knowing traditionally in chronological order of how we've come to know over time, third person, and then first and then second person, did it emerge out of action research?
Well, action research does draw on it.
Okay.
Not fourth person so much,
no.
But there's a lot in the action research that talks about the first, second, and third of how do you source action with kind of conscientiously. So it's like, how do you bring the frameworks that research has to offer, which help us to maybe kind of suspend assumptions and things that we might impose on a situation to really pay attention
Okay.
to what's happening, and then act from that place. So that is what, but you'll find it, I mean, even one of the places that we're kind of delving into, and I can't speak too much, but it's like second person neuroscience. I mean, it shows up in all kinds of interesting places.
Fascinating.
We would initially, our starting point would be the action research kind
Okay.
of tradition. Yeah.
Thank you. So Jessica, in the work that you did that evolved into Hope Circuits, there was, I had the sense of such a deep dive into engaging with other people and as you said, listening and tapping into the wisdom they might have about how you change the world of higher education to get past inequities, to get past rigidity, and you crystallize that. Eventually, you crystallize that into measures that you put forward in the book that people can take. They can understand how to take these measures and act on them. And you've worked with groups and collectives getting together of people in the world of higher education and exchanging on this. So you're passing on to the world in that book strategies that people can use to make change in community, not solitary change like it's my drinking is making my life terrible, I'm going to quit, which is a good kind of change to do. That's not my own biography, but
Like that doesn't sound fun.
but change in community. So in the chapter of your book, the closing chapter of your book that we handed out to our public, there's one heading after another for building Hope University that covers these kinds of strategies. I'm just going to pull out one initially, and then I'll ask you about another one too. The one that struck me as really reaching into something I love is change your language, change the world. Would you like to talk a little bit about how language changes the world and rhetoric? And a professor of mine once said, rhetoric as opposed to mere rhetoric. So true rhetoric, not mirror. Yes.
And rehabilitating rhetoric.
Yeah.
We hear rhetoric now in the political field as something that somebody's trying to trick you into something. And as an early modernist, rhetoric is an essential form of deliberating across difference, of listening with an intention to transform, of using the world around us to sense make, not just because we're right, but because we want to get it right with other folks. It allows us, rhetoric allows us to transform into a kind of divine intelligence that Aristotle talked about. And so, I every time somebody uses the word rhetoric in a pejorative sense, I wince. Because I'm like, oh no, it's beautiful. And it is elegant, and it is using language not just to reflect the world, but to shape it. There's this beautiful novelist, Ocean Vuong, who says, we tell young people that the future is in their hands, but we're not telling them the right thing. We should be telling them that the future is in their mouths. It's the language we use, it's the stories we tell, it's the ways in which we are meeting people in the field of the other. And we really have limited ways of connecting together. Language is one of them, embodiment is another, co-creating and in space and time in bodies, but in language. And so, change your language, change the world. I tell a little story in, I think, chapter 10 about one of my dear friends, Susie Andrews, who's a Buddhist scholar. And she was talking to me about, doing a bunch of things and trying to sort of put them under an umbrella and, connect Buddhism to story time in her, kids' primary class to, an 11th century Tibetan shrine. Like she was putting it all together. And she goes, well, Jessica, I'm feeding two birds with one seed. And she just said it. Like she didn't say it to teach me anything. She didn't say it to guide me on anything. But as soon as she said it, I kind of got knocked off my chair a little bit because I confronted my own use of that violent idiom. Whenever do we say kill two birds with one stone is a good thing? Murdering birds, not on my list of things to do in Hope is strategic infrastructure. And so she just did that slight edit, and it slightly changed my relationship to that sort of phrase. And then it slightly changed my relationship to different kinds of words that I hadn't necessarily surfaced. And so one of the I had to learn Change Your Language, Change the World the hard way when I was recording this book as an audiobook.
Okay.
So one of my friends, Cynthia Bruce, who's an incredible scholar, she's a blind scholar. She works on disability studies. She's amazing. She calls me up as soon as the book comes out and she goes, how am I supposed to access this? Again, knocked me right off my chair. I was like, oh my goodness, of course, the written word is a barrier for access for so many folks for so many different reasons. So I called up McGill Queen's University Press. To their credit, they do not do audiobooks. They're like, we'll figure this out. I was like, I will get money from the Jaroslawski Foundation. We will hire an actor. It's going to be amazing. We'll get this book so Cynthia, audience of one, can access Hope Circuits and engage in the process of rewiring our organizations. And so push comes to shove, there is no paid actor. It is just me in a studio in the Eastern Townships recording this book for 40 hours. And I am special circle of hell that Dante could not imagine is hearing your own voice stuck in a little sound booth with no audience and hearing your voice multiple times. Every day I had to like play Snoop Dogg in my car. Like it was a 20-minute drive and I had to pump myself up to go because I was like, I don't want to do this. But I did. I apologize to anyone who has listened to that audiobook or listened to my voice. It's just, So anyway, I'm reading the book. And from the time I wrote the book to when I was reading the book, I had a wonderful set of encounters with my friend Sheila Kotemik, who is this lovely Indigenous scholar and advocate and educator. And we were in conversation and she said, Jessica, you can't use the word stakeholder because stakeholder is literally somebody standing in the middle of the land with a stake enacting colonial dispossession. Yeah. So I said, oh, now that I know I can do better. Fantastic. Fast forward to me in the studio reading the word stakeholder 6 times in my book. I had said it 6 times because I hadn't had a conversation with Sheila as I was writing the book about this particular term. So I'm sitting there in great discomfort, trying to persuade my sound engineer that I can edit out stakeholder and replace it with something else. He was like, you can't, you've got to read from the script. I'm like, I'm the author of this script. But all that to say it's messy and it's imperfect and it's a journey and it's a process. And you don't see language until you encounter it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once it's visible, it's no longer invisible. So words like stakeholder and words, like feed 2 birds with 1 stone, we can change our language in small edits while also being attentive to the grand narratives of our time, right? So Krista Tippett, the On Being podcast host, I'm going to send you all of the things. She's a beautiful thinker. And she said, we're addicted to the grand narratives of our time that are addicted to scarcity, crisis, deficit, loss, lack. Our little lizard brains light up, right? We get tweets from a madman about ending a whole civilization and our bodies dysregulate in real time. But we're also addicted to those grand narratives. And she says that other stories are also possible. Stories of entanglement, of interdependence, of beauty, of vividness, that the dystopias are always also entangled with utopias. And so we get to choose what stories we tell. We get to choose deliberately and intentionally what stories we tell that mirror our reality, but also shape them. So that change the language, change the world tool, I use all the time and I actually revise in real time. I'll say something like, nope, I actually am going to take that back and revise that in real time because I just heard it out loud in a different way or it landed in a different context and I just heard it. And I'm going to play with it and I'm going to be iterative about my use of language.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
The other heading in that chapter that I wanted to draw your attention to is stay with the trouble. It crops up twice in this as a heading, and you discuss, and then you go on with a different heading, and then you come back to stay with the trouble. I just wondered if you wanted to comment on the fact that it crops up twice in your closing chapter.
Yeah, thank you. It's one of the 10 conceptual tools. It's one that I had to learn experientially in the middle of COVID. It's one that was really hard. I had, children, cancer, and COVID all happen within a week. It was not an intellectual exercise. It was not a theoretical or fancy conceptual framework. It was something that I had to live every single day, and I had a choice. And Pima Chodron was one of my guides in this. I read and connected with so many thoughtful luminaries, but the Parker Palmer, so he's a Quaker philosopher. He wrote a book called Courage to Teach that I read every year at the end of the academic year. And he says, if I can get through it, so beautiful. He says, there are broken-hearted people everywhere. Those that are broken apart in 1,000 shards because the world is hard and brutal, and those who are willing to be broken open into new spaces. And he says we have a choice to be broken apart or to be broken open. And I have to tell you that every single day I had that choice, and sometimes I chose broken apart. And sometimes I chose hide under the covers or howl into the abyss. And other days I chose broken open. I was able to, with my bandwidth and community, sit in curiosity, sit in what am I supposed to be learning right now? How am I supposed to understand this world? How do I metabolize it in real time? How do I sit in epistemic humility and wonder and I talked to the universe. I don't expect the universe to ever care about me or talk back to me, but I talked to the universe a lot. I was like, okay, universe, what lesson do I need to learn right now? Or do I need to learn again? And I think that staying with the trouble, sitting in it, we're not super good at that. We're really bad at it in the academy, right? Where we just sort of skip to the good bits, or we sort of say, don't be messy, be perfect or impervious or have a right answer. And I think that there's an invitation there for us to stay with the trouble, and the answer is in the trouble. I say in the book, this is where my mother also called me up because I swore again. And I said, sometimes you have to sit in the shit, and sometimes the shit is manure. And she was like, you said shit twice in 2 sentences. But like sometimes the shit is manure. Sometimes there's a fecundity, not to gaslight ourselves, not to engage in toxic positivity, not to say this is not really, really hard, but to understand that sometimes the most beautiful things we do are hard. And that hope isn't fluffy and hand waving and a stance, that it requires us to be badass and dynamic and unruly and disobedient and sit in the hardness of it.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you, Eva, there's a really cool, almost case study story in the scholarly article of the 2 readings you sent us, not one that we sent out to others, about something that occurred in Liberia that was empowered by the methodologies that the Presencing Institute advances and fosters. Could you tell us the story of that?
Sure.
Thank you.
And actually, and I would connect it to also what you're talking about, staying with the trouble. Or I have a colleague, Dana Cunningham, who particularly coming out of Black Lives Matter, she talked about keeping the gaze steady, you know, and I think that's part of our role. I think particularly if you're city privileged, like don't look away. Keep the gaze steady. And the Liberia project. So the methodologies that we use are they're processes for bringing people together and together drawing on what I was talking about, the sensing capacity, the shifting, and that requires a shift in our awareness. And it requires us to be able to actually kind of turn the lens, turn the camera back, and be able to see ourselves in our sort of listening and paying attention to what's happening around us. And so what the kinds of things we'll do, we'll bring people together, we'll integrate moments of stillness, we'll integrate processes, for example, so part of what happened in Liberia, that might invite a group to embody their system and to together bear witness to that and when you embody, this is not a cognitive act, right? It's an act of sensing. If I step into an aspect of my system, or a role in my system, if I step into government and embody that, that's not something that I'm really thinking about and shaping from a place of what I know cognitively about government. It's a place of drawing on what does my body know when I quiet down and pay attention to it, and acting from that place. When you bring groups together in these processes, it offers the opportunity for them together in an instant to witness a representation of their system that's really it's their system at a level that's below what's visible, right? So if we think about what's below with the iceberg, what's below the water line, or with the soil, what's below the soil level. So and I might speak a little bit about some ways that we're also experimenting with this, but in Liberia, this was a UN project around the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, bringing heads of different UN organizations who normally act in really siloed ways, and bring them together really with a mandate to look at how can we effectively work differently together? How can we be that? It was that sort of broad. And when they were able, and it's a longer process than this, but there was something incredibly powerful. You talked about your land acknowledgement. The land has memory, right? The land has history. The ancestors live. They ended up doing this on a very historically significant place in Liberia. It was actually the place of genocide. And they did this embodiment, and through their embodiment, without going through it all, they were able to see what are some of the dynamics at play here that we don't see in our everyday life, right? How is it that we interact and don't? And so kind of to shortcut, to fast forward, by virtue of being able to see, and we say see and sense. So one thing to see, seeing still pretty cognitive, but I feel it. You know, I feel the pain of our disconnection, right? I feel the pain of our dysfunction. And I can see some of how that functions, that they were, so they do this process, you see and sense, you make some sense together. Part of the process is that you take that seeing and sensing, that's the source of action, right? So it's, it isn't sort of consciousness and contemplation for its own sake. It's really a tool for, can we do systems differently together? Can we have, and so the prototypes, if you like, or the actions that came out of this kind of event of gathering these people together. I mean, one was a commitment, a cross-organizational commitment with the government to end female genital mutilation by working with the women who perform the ceremony, who perform the ceremony, to ensure that they don't lose status or income in that shift, right? So I mean, that's huge. There's another initiative that was about decentralizing the UN, so that everything happens in the capital, right? And anybody who wants any resources has to come there. The UN let go of it and allowed there to be another hub that grew. And then there were several other just really significant outcomes. But nobody came into that room to say, we're going to address female genital mutilation. We're going to come together to experience ourselves differently together and see what happens from that. And so this is where we talk about creating a generative space or generative social soil.
Thank you. Yeah. And I guess that's what I had in mind in thinking I'd raise that question, that it gives a concrete sense of the unfolding of this process that can then yield change.
And maybe I'll just say something. So research. How is this a research method? And that's kind of what we're playing with that right now. We've had something just kind of internally, we're calling it the Deep Sensing Lab, where we come together, and these are people who do this practice, so they kind of know they sort of have some skill in how do you attend. And bring into that space cases. And so some of them are cases that they're hard. We have colleagues who are in Taiwan right now trying to cultivate spaces of dialogue around democracy. It's kind of a dangerous thing to do. That was what we had. Two folks come in who, from the US State Department, when Doge was going through and violating, and they put on LinkedIn, we'd like to pair displaced workers with qualified coaches. If you're interested, let us know, in two forms, and they had like 4,000 people sign up. I mean, but embedded in those that work of trying to steward systems change is really kind of our existential moment, right? And so we hold that together and we keep the gaze steady. and we stay with the trouble.
Yeah,
And we draw on, we hear the story, we do a contemplative practice around it, we do an embodiment practice around it.
Yeah.
And then we move into dialogue. So by holding the gaze steady, something emerges that's a new understanding, a new insight, but also we change in the process.
yeah,
Now, how our work then is, how do you move that into academia as a valid research methodology?
yeah.
We're not there, but that's the space, right?
And how do we do that to the academy?
How do we do
right?
that to the academy?
And I think that's what Hope Circuits is
Right.
doing, is going in without the product,
Yes.
right? And we're not going to go and reform Senate, but if I go and sit with 90 senators and say something else is possible, what does shared governance look like that is generous and generative? You get like 10 new things adopted after consent agenda, learning communities, like all of the things happen if you say, let's get together, let's gather, let's do collective sense making, let's build some shared vocabulary, let's find out what our fundamental principles are, let's live into some questions together, and then all of a sudden change happens, and you can't plan it. And in fact, the most interesting change is not the ones that you go in with an agenda.
And what I would also say to add to that, so interesting things happen, and the people don't come out of that feeling flattened.
Yeah,
So right that you come
Yes.
out of that, you're thinking, oh,
And
I'm-
agentic,
yeah,
right? That
yeah.
they're empowered, that their agents have changed, that they can be architects of creative futures, that they own the stewardship of the complex organization or the mission of the institution.
And
Yeah.
so they come out feeling flattened because of all the energy that's that's been given.
in some processes, you go
Yeah.
through and you just like, oh, I've just been put through the ringer.
And
But-
agentic,
yeah.
empowered
Well,
too.
Yeah,
The good ones come out and they're catalysts, right?
this is
And
what I
they're-
mean. So these are different. So
Yeah.
I'm saying just the difference of the processes where attention is paid to process.
Yeah.
So and that's why we talk about language. I really like the language that's kind of around regenerative. So drawing from agriculture, but just
Yeah,
can we just do our system? We do the things we do in a way that's regenerative, so we come out of it feeling enlivened.
I love your language of soil and generative and grounded, like the ecology of that is so important.
yeah.
Yeah, we ignore that to our peril.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.